So it's a great pleasure to welcome Ms. Anne Wanner today here with us.
Good afternoon. My name's Anne and I'm in Preston, in the northwest of England, and it's a remarkably sunny and warm day today here.
Great news from Preston. So Anne is working as a regenerative practitioner, living building accredited professional, architectural technologist and architect. So really talking about design, planning, construction, the technical elements. So really a great pleasure having you here with us and, giving us a little intro on what we can do in terms of really design and, how does it all start and what we can do right or wrong. Second speaker on the call today is Mr. Wojciech Pilnacek from Cyrkl, a waste resource platform. So Wojciech, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So we are Cyrkl. I will introduce us later during the webinar. So not waste our time now. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thanks a lot for joining us. And yeah, we look forward to definitely hear more about, what Cyrkl is doing in terms of construction, or how is your engagement, how you can help companies to manage or solve their problems connected to this. And then we have the expert on systemic waste prevention. I tend to always say waste management first because it's like a strong habit, but prevention is the next word that we're heading to. It's also a big mindset shift, and I'm really glad that we have Mr. Michael Rada here with us from Industry 5.0. So Michael, would you like to maybe tell us like 2-3 words?
Nice to be with you. I'm speaking to you from Pilsen, Czech Republic, and really, it shouldn't be the second option. Waste prevention should be the first one all the time. Mm-hmm. But we must change the mindset. And I hope that this 7 will help to understand why to do so and how efficiently to do this. Thank you.
Beautiful to have you here. And last but not least, which is also like a special role for Mr. Mike Boyle. Thank you for joining us today. So Mike will be also in a role of a kind of co-moderator, co-host. So we're going to go into nice discussions, I believe, today. He is an experienced curator of radio shows, and he is curating his own show, which is called Radio Tipping Point, or at Radio Tipping Point. So I highly recommend you to maybe also follow his show and, dive into the topics that he's having or discussions that he's having on a regular basis, also representing the Cyrkl of Vienna project. So we're going to hear more also a little bit about that one. So with this, we have quite a tight timing today, a lot of topics, a lot of perspectives. I would just start with Anne with the first presentation. We do the presentation first, and then we go into the Q&A, into the discussion.
So I'm an architect and architectural technologist. I'm also, because I didn't have enough on my plate, doing a PhD called the Co-Creating the Subtle Art of Regenerative Practice. I'm very interested in how we get the messages of what we are talking about. So as an educator, how do we educate those other people that we need to be bringing into this conversation? So it's about trying to pull together academia, practice and research closer together so that the conversations can actually have an impact on people's way of life and things like that. But the little sort of symbol in the top corner, the Living Future Accredited Professional, is a qualification I got last year, but it's something I've been aware of for a number of years. So the Living Building Challenge is an international sustainability building certification scheme that was created in 2006. And it's described as a philosophy, an advocacy tool, and a certification program. It started in the northwest of America, so in Seattle. And if you see behind me, there's the Space Needle back there, because I actually studied in Seattle, and there's something in the water there as well about sort of what they are doing there. But I'm also very fortunate here in the northwest of England that we have one of the Living Building Challenges literally down the road. So it's always played on my mind how we could do things differently. I see it, so therefore I think, well, it's being done. Other people can do it as well. Talked about sort of design because that is sort of my remit. That's what I do. That's what I sort of talk about. But this first slide is about that idea of designing for adaptability. There is a philosophy that we'll come on to later about sort of how we build in layers and things like that. But basically the argument is that we don't design buildings to be adapted. They are designed to be fixed. We have a brief, and the brief sort of says this is going to be who's going to use it. We never revisit that brief. We never think about how that building is going to be in 5 years or in 10 years. So how a classroom might need to change because of technologies that we bring in, how health services change and adapt and things like that. So the argument is that we don't design them to adapt, but actually society is constantly changing around us. So they are adapting, but not very well. The example I've used is this Martini Hospital in Groningen, which was designed on a very regular sort of structural framework with the idea that you could add to it, you could take elements out of it. The facade is sort of separate, and it's just it's designed that it could change from hospital actually into residential as well. Now, this is where I spend a lot of my time, this idea of designing for the layers of the building. And I've just sort of expanded that when I was putting this presentation together to think about how we design for the layers of the waste that we actually build into a building. So Frank Duffy, who was an RIBA president in 1995, sort of said there is no such thing really as a building. There's just a series of layers of almost time and how long those material components are going to be in that building. And the little diagram sort of, I think, shows that in terms of the grey and the blue line are the sort of bits outside the building. We start then thinking about the structure, which if we keep it separate from the skin and things like that, can be there for 200 years, 300 years time. And that when we start changing that, that's when it starts to cost money and costs us sort of problems. But if we then separate the skin from the structure, so the sort of the cladding system and things like that, that I then could be around sort of for 50 years. We make sure then the services are accessible and we can get to them. So when we need to retrofit a building to deal with heat or how we ventilate a building and things like that, we can do that in a way that doesn't impact on the other areas of that building. And then we get closer to the building and we start thinking about sort of the space plan. So again, sort of keeping that flexible and loose. That means that, we can change, we can adapt, we can take bits out of the building and add new bits into the building. And then thinking about sort of the stuff that we put in the building, so the carpets and the lighting and things like that, and making sure again that they can be taken out, they can be recycled, new stuff can be added without sort of affecting the whole envelope of the building. But then also finally, the people inside, actually thinking about how we have an impact on the things that we use as well. So yeah, designing for the layers of waste, separating the different building elements out so that they can be taken out, taken away and recycled. And reused. This idea that we need to, again, start at the end, think about whoever it is, how are they going to take the building apart? So how do we disassemble a building? Or maybe how do we think about how it decomposes? Though I have said, I did a lecture on it not so long ago, we should ban the word demolition. For us in the UK, demolition is knock it flat, put it into landfill, plant a park over it and just ignore what is in there. So I truly believe that buildings should be joyful, waste nothing, generate their own power, cost nothing to run, only take what they need from their surroundings and ambitiously actually begin to start thinking about how we heal themselves. The thing about sort of the word demolition, I teach in a studio at the University of Central Lancashire, and we actually banned the word sustainability a few years ago. Not that we don't agree with sort of sustainability, just that by taking the word out of the language, it made the students have to think and describe what they were trying to do in a better way. So that's my rationale for sort of saying we should actually ban the word demolition. And this is, like I sort of say, the Living Building Challenge qualification that I got at the end of last year. And there's a series of sort of petals and things like that, but I'm really focusing on the materials petal, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one along, which talks about endorsing products that are safe for all species through all time. And there's a number of imperatives there underneath it. So this idea of a red list, so ensuring that no toxic materials actually go into the building in the first place. Or if we're talking about retrofit, that when we are sort of replacing bits, that we are taking sort of the bad stuff out and replacing it with sort of good stuff that's healthy and environmental. But it also has an impact on sort of maintenance and cleaning regimes as well, that when we're designing a building that's going to be a living building challenge, that actually someone has got to have thought about the cleaning regime, what's going to happen in that building, what kind of chemicals might we be bringing into that building, and making sure that they don't come into the building. Thinking about the embodied carbon footprint of the materials that we are using. The 12th imperative talks about responsible industry. So really advocating this idea that it's not just thinking about what the material is going to do to us in the building, but actually thinking about the lifetime of that material. Where's it come from? What's that? How has that, the making of that material, what has it had in terms of an impact and things like that? The 13th imperative talks about the living economy sourcing. So where is this material come from? How is it damaging that part of the world and things like that? And then this idea about sort of net positive waste, that actually we shouldn't be generating any waste. And if we think about sort of what goes into the building, then we also need to think about how it comes out of it at the end of the day. And that idea of actually, maybe if we're talking about sort of retrofitting buildings, sort of taking the toxic materials out and then designing back in with the nature side of things. Next. And there you go. So I hope I have got you thinking about starting at the end. Start to think about your surroundings sort of differently. And there are my contact details, because I would love this conversation to continue.
Yeah. So firstly, I will introduce our company, Cyrkl, and what we do, where we are coming from actually. So we started in 2019 in Prague, in Czechia. Now we are covering about 11 European countries with our physical branches. We have our people here. We have over 17,000 registered companies on our platform. And what we do, we are doing our best to interconnect different companies, the waste producers, the recyclers, or the other manufacturing companies who can use the recycled materials between each other. And there we are providing the circular economic goal. The problem which we are facing is quite huge. We are extracting about 100 gigatons of materials per year, and we are wasting a lot of them. So it's really needed to find some solutions how to recycle them and get them back to the manufacturing processes and to usage. Which solution we are actually providing? We build it a B2B platform. This is the Cyrkl. You can visit us on cyrkl.com, and there you can add your materials, your construction demolition materials, or anything. And we are, via smart algorithms, connecting you with the right people who are able to use them. So from our services, as I said, we are in 11 countries in Europe. We are going to expand more next year. And we can connect you with the right people who can use your materials, your waste. So we have the marketplace for that. You can add there only offers, or we are also able to do auctions of the materials since the beginning of this year. And what we do besides this activity is consulting services, where we are doing our waste scans and also pre-demolition audits, where we are coming from factories to construction demolition sites physically. So we are inspecting which waste or which materials are there, and then we are looking for optimizations from financial and environmental point of view, because one without each other usually does not function. And I think which is quite also new is a green sourcing. So sometimes the companies also want to have some recycled materials into their production. So we are also able to find the materials in the market provided to the manufacturing processes. So now some examples which we did during the pre-demolition audits, which we are doing currently now on one big real estate in Prague, in the center of Prague. So some examples from this project. So we met there asphalt bitumen mixtures on the roofing, for example. So there are companies who are able to crush them and use them as a fraction in asphalt production instead of sending it to landfill. So that's the first example. Fiber cement roofing. In the former times, they're full of asbestos now. The situation is completely different. They can be used for backfilling, but the best way how to use them, they are also, it was also possible to crush them and use them as an additive to cement. So it's much better way what to do with such a fiber cement roofing. Third example is using rubble, concrete, mixed rubble. So there are many possibilities how to use it and new construction materials or for backfilling also. But the first thing is much more interesting because you can, for example, crush the concrete on site and add it to a new concrete mixture also on site. So you save a lot of CO2, for example, resources and money if you don't transport it out of the site. So very good practice. We have our partners here, there in the Czech Republic, Czech Technical University, who are testing the mix, but they are okay with the construction legislation and all this stuff. So very, very useful thing. Also concrete, which we met in one production company who is producing the RA to concrete bricks. So it is quite interesting thing that if you crush it, you can return it back to the manufacturing process, which is the optimal way, or they are also now sending it to a cat litter producer who can produce this stuff. So if you are a cat owner, you can be a recyclable one. So that's about this. And then insulations, we are using a lot of insulations now in this time. It's a very important topic. So we found the use for mineral wool, for example. So we have companies producing own insulations from this material. So there's no need to send it to landfill, but you can produce a new done insulation from this material. Or there is a company who is pressing it to briquettes, and then it's possible to use it as an input manufacturing process for mineral wool in the manufacturing sites. Polystyrene, it's quite a big topic, at least there in Czechia, because we have a government funded program which allow people to insulate their houses. So a lot of polystyrene is produced, and also in the future it will be at least partly given from the building. So a lot of waste from this kind of insulating material. So there is also a possibility to produce blown insulations from it. So it can be used again as insulation. It can be used in lightweight concrete mixtures, in the special insulating floor mixtures, and also producers of fresh new polystyrene are quite interested in this type of material if it is clean. So you can send it back to them and they can produce new polystyrene from it. And the last thing is you can also use it as filling for seating bags. That is a tiny thing. So that's it. A plasterboard, also very often used material. So good practice in Western Europe is to crush it and separate the paper part and the gypsum part. Paper recycled as a paper, the gypsum sent back to the companies who are producing the plasterboard. There in Czechia, we usually send it to backfilling purposes or to landfills, which is quite an optimal way of using it. So there are companies like, for example, Knauf or Saint-Gobain who are able to take it back and use and produce the new plasterboard from the gypsum, or some also producers of fertilizers are also interested in this kind of material. Mineral ceiling panels, if you ever work in an open space, you probably know it. If you just look on top of the room, so it's also quite interesting that they can be recycled back and create new panels from these materials. Another example is PVC. PVC is in the waste, but usually meant as a not very nice material because it contains chlorine. But there are many recyclers of PVC. They are able to produce new PVC from the old one. So, for example, PVC floors, if they are clean and not very old, you can recycle them to new PVC. And the last example, our floorboard was from one project in Austria and Germany. It was a company Lindner, and they collect these special floorboards containing wood and gypsum, and they are refurbishing them and using them again as a floorboards. So that's it. There are some references, and we will be very glad if you visit our website, cyrkl.com, and join us on this way to more sustainable planet.
So, let's move ahead with Michael. Michael Rada, now it's your turn, and we need to be sharp with 7 minutes.
Yeah, don't worry. I did not prepare a presentation this time. I just have 2 slides. Because what I would like to talk about is the waste prevention, not waste management, because no matter whether we speak about the physical landfill or about online landfill, when we speak about waste, because I don't think that the products must turn to the waste first to be processed. That's a wrong approach, and especially if we are speaking about the construction industry. Many buildings, I'm sitting in one which is 120 years old. Why should this building be demolished just to build a new one with thinner walls, with worse insulation? Because the owner of this building who let me work here, he said no. Why? Because it was built forever. I like very much what Anne says, that the new buildings should be built to be, let's say, reconstructed, to be repurposed, to be multifunctional, because this is the way. I like very much, for example, the new tiny houses, where, and this is a topic which we did not spoke about, why should we have a flats for one which are 100 square meter big and just one person live in? That's a question, and there are many ways. And I will just share 2 slides. Generally, in Industry 5.0, we recognize 5 types of waste. Until September, there has been only 4, but we added 1 more. And to do that, I will explain why we did it. And here are the 5 types of waste, which we prevent to happen. The physical waste, which Mr. Pelnacek spoke about, yeah, this is the trash and garbage. It can be prevented. Social waste, which was touched during Anne's presentation, includes people, but even animals who cannot live meaningful life. But there is the urban waste, what we are speaking about. And we are speaking about hundreds and thousands of empty buildings, which has currently no function. And we speak about green fields, which are built next to these buildings without even trying to reuse these old, but much better buildings frequently. And there is a process waste, which, as I said, is the why should a product become waste first to be utilized after? I don't see any reason for that. And the last one, which we add just last month, is the wasting of time. Because this is unbelievable. Time is the most precious asset which we get when we are born, and at the same time is most wasted one, which is wrong, as you do understand. What we did, we prevent the waste happen, and I spent 8 years to write something which was never written before. It is the waste prevention policy or the framework. Because I think, and I hope you will understand, that nothing that can be used or utilized again must become waste. Everything must be considered as a primary pre-waste existing resource and remain in the system. And the secondary use or utilization should not be limited to the primary function of the product or material, and can be executed by everyone respecting the rules and regulations, and collecting, sorting, bulking, transportation, and trade are not being considered secondary utilization. And if not utilized on a primary location, it must be offered to someone else before being wasted. And it is very important to understand one thing: there is no waste if we do not waste. And what is strange, that not a single legislation in the world define how waste become waste, how product become waste. This is a process called wasting. And the wasting is a process in which product or material of any kind, form, and volume become waste. In fact, wasting is a system failure, but we adopt it and make it to standard. So if it's a failure, it must be prevented first without any limitation or legal restriction. And very important point is that wasting is not a feature of a product or material, but a result of human behavior. And single use represents one of the most applied forms of wasting. What I would like to say when we speak about the construction business is one very important topic. And mention it, we are building single-use buildings. If you look, one example out of the construction industry, the power towers, there are billions of those all across the world. And have you ever considered that they have only one function? To carry the wire from A to B. There is nothing else. The highest one is 2 meters lower than the Eiffel Tower, and is of course in China. But why shouldn't we use these towers for something else? Why shouldn't we give them a second function? Everybody knows the wind generation where the propellers turn this way, generally the blades, but there exists a solution and they're turned this way, which means we can fit it inside a tower, electric tower, and we will have power generation on the power transmission, local, available immediately. And this is what I would like to discuss, if there is time for discussion generally, to see how we can merge, because to understand this, we have to break the silos between industries. There shouldn't be any silos. There is only one role model for Industry 5.0, it's nature. And why it's here for billions of years? Because it does not have silos, and because nature does not waste. And that's all from me today. Thank you.
So that was a perfect ending, Michael. Nature does not waste. It's amazing. Thank you so much for, sharing your thoughts and perspective, and basically also the approach which you share with companies worldwide and advice and consulting. So with this, I would hand over to Mike. Sorry.
Great. No, that's great. Thank you very much, Jana. And I would like to piggyback, Michael, on that of what you talked about. There are a couple of things, and obviously thanks to all of our presenters today. I found a commonality in some of the things that you're talking about, and I felt that there were some things that perhaps looking at it from a different perspective that immediately come to mind, and I didn't hear them talked about. If I go back to Jane Jacobs, who wrote a book, The Death and Life of American Cities, and she mentioned, and we're talking about something that took place 60 years ago, over 60 years ago, that there was a point in time where we stopped building for our community, looking at not the single building, but the entire entity as being where people live. And we started concentrating on the individual buildings. And if we can look at the root cause of a lot of things that were talked about today, I think that certainly from the urban design perspective, very often we will come to the conclusion that that is the source where we have our problems. And I'd be very keen to get feedback from our presenters tied to that idea of not building buildings for the sake of building buildings, but rather looking at buildings as being part of an ecosystem within a community. And there's one last thing, if I could add to that mix, I'm obviously throwing a bunch of things in your perspective. I did not hear, apart from Michael, I did not hear the word people talked about at all. Aren't buildings built for people? Open the stage.
So who'd like to comment first? Anne, would you like to? Ladies first.
You have to unmute yourself, Anne.
I do. And I'm really sorry that I didn't mention people, But I also have a problem with term. So we have this word at the moment that sort of gets used, human-centric design. And I keep going, well, what were we designing for if it wasn't for the human? So for me, it just goes through everything that we do, that we think about sort of, and I did mention humans in the sort of building and layers, how the building has an impact on the people and the people have an impact on the building and how that conversation goes. But yes, apologies from my point of view that I suppose, like I sort of say, I just assume it's like sustainable. I think we should be talking about that's not a sustainable building, that's an unsustainable building, that the building should just be sustainable anyhow. Does that make sort of sense? It's so yes, apologies that I didn't really focus on people.
Sorry, if I can just quickly interject, and I'll give you the stage. The intention was not to scold. It's just that very often we forget the reason why we build buildings to begin with, and that was really my point. And so that you did mention that, yes, I grant you that, but we keep forgetting that it's not just for people. Obviously, it's our whole environment. And if we do not look at the collective and we concentrating on the individual, then we should not be surprised that we keep running in this loop that we can't get out of. And that was the point. Michael, please.
I just had an interesting discussion last week. Generally, we came to the topic, why business, who is planning every single day, we spend a business planning, we have many plannings, is not so efficient as nature, which does not plan at all. What is the reason for that? Because I haven't seen a single tree holding a business plan in the branch. I don't know, maybe you have, but I don't. And we discussed it, and we came to one interesting topic. Maybe
I'd love to answer that one.
Okay.
It's nature ever playing? There are two roles that nature does not play. Nature is not a consumer, and nature is not a producer.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm positive, because they do not. When we produce, we're making something on a particular reason, where it has nothing to do with an ecosystem. Where if you talk about business creates because they are trying to fulfill a certain need of consumers, and there is a symbiotic relationship between the consumer and the producer. Whereas nature is just being, and they're just doing.
We have answered. We came to maybe we express the same, but with different words generally. We came to the fact that nature does not live in silos, and industries live in silos, in many silos, horizontal, vertical, whatever. There are so many silos which generally play against each other. But nature does not care whether the leaf fall on the Czech border or on the German side of the border. It's simple, leaf down, and something happened with it. And that's the topic which I think that in the past build the people who build the cities, build it for people, for humans, not for cars, not for industries, they build it for humans. But right now, we lost this approach. You see, there is more, if you look out of the window, probably there will be more cars to be seen than people walking. And if you see the cities where they discuss whether they will make bike lines or whatever, you know, I'm riding electric unicycle, I can ride everywhere. But this is not the bike line. This is not the construction. And we have only 1 day per year, which is called car-free day. 1 day per year, which changed completely the image of the city at that day. Of course, there are cities which are well better. You know about the line, which is what do you think, for example, about the line, the new project in Saudi Arabia? This 500 kilometers or how long, 100 kilometer long city, 500 meters wide, in the middle of two walls. Is it the right direction?
A great point. So let's leave the other speakers to give some reaction to that. Michael, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts. Just maybe some observation from my side on this topic. As not a professional, I'm not in the construction segment as a professional, building or planning or designing or using or producing materials. However, where we really see the trend is going, and it's also the design for people for a certain time. So and you confirmed it also with your observation in terms of the buildings are built for ages, or the old ones were built for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50. Actually, there was no timeline. The materials were very solid. They would be built to last or used to last. And this is also a little bit the point which I would like to bridge to, which Anne made with the adaptability. So we are not anymore in such, and maybe it's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity. We are not in such stable times anymore. I mean, when we talk about climate change, we know that we need to prepare for different climate conditions, different demands for buildings as well in terms of material or resilience to extreme weather events, etc. So we need to be able to adjust, use new features, new materials that are also that will keep up with the speed of changes that we are to face. So Anne, what is your perspective on this? I mean, what do you see as trends? I mean, this is what you do, your field that you work in terms of living, building Europe. How strong is that really? How much you see this concept being applied in real buildings that are currently in planning? You showed us a nice example from Groningen. Where else are this just, flagship projects, or are this really becoming a kind of mainstream?
And no, unfortunately, they're not becoming mainstream, and that's for all sorts of reasons. One of the things that we are dealing with here in the UK, and so we have this idea about sort of getting to net zero, and there was some figure the other day that 62% of the things that we need to do to get to net zero isn't about technology or about new ways of doing things. It's about societal and behavioural changes. It's us as the individuals or as the collective actually changing what we do and how we do. So whether that's where we fly, how we live. So I get very involved with the idea of sort of co-housing, this moving away from this idea, one person, one home, or one bedroom, one person, things like that. Or I have a house and therefore I have to have a washing machine. What happened to the good old laundrettes where you shared that material and that you came together and things like that? So it's about change. It's about the change that we need in society and we need in the behavioural changes. And for me, where we are really making a mess of things is in the educational sector. We are still teaching the sort of materials and the processes that got us into this mess in the first place. I would love a university to go, do you know what, we're just banning concrete. Concrete is a big no-no for all our design projects, or every model that we make in our studios and things like that is made out of recycled materials and things like that. Or that education actually touched on that thing about sort of silos, where we have architects, building surveyors, quantity surveyors, and that's just in the built environment, never mind where health might come in, or education might come in, or the technology might come in, things like that. So we need to completely revisit how we educate. There's a wonderful group in the UK called Teach the Future, and they advocate for two things. One, and these are 14 to 16-year-olds. These aren't sort of, college students or anything like that. These are young people who are basically saying the curriculum that we follow needs to be turned on its head, and the climate emergency needs to be the umbrella subject, and everything else sort of sits underneath that. So climate emergency in history, climate emergency in literature, climate emergency in maths and things like that. And then the second thing that they advocate for is that every building, every school building in the UK should be adapted and become an educational tool in its own right. So where does the rainwater go? How do we deal with the heating? How do we deal with a school that's on the coast compared to a school that's in an inner city? They should be different. They should be, by their sort of hyper-localization of architecture, they should be fundamentally different. And that in itself, that sort of, I have been in and out of buildings all day today. We should, buildings are so important to who we are as individuals, not the, sort of star architects or anything like that, but buildings, really good quality buildings that we all need and deserve. There you go. Said my piece now.
For sure. Thanks a lot for sharing. Now, Michael, just a quick one, because we would like to hear also Carl, and maybe Mike can also add from the Cyrkl Vienna perspective.
It was great topic. You name it, education is very important. We generally started so-called GAR H Academy. And we add one more thing. The students should have the ability to practice what they have learned in a real life. So to be a factory next door, and they should they can try, and they should be able to come back and say to the teacher, sorry, it does not work. We are learning something that does not work. Come with us, let's try. And so not as a monologue in the schools, but real dialogue, which generally was very well visible in COVID times, where generally the first, after they switched to virtual, the first one, what they should ask students to teach the teachers how to use the internet, because the students know it much more better, but I don't know a single country which does this. Sorry, that was all.
Beautiful, thank you. Mike?
Just to piggyback on that of what Michael was talking about, well, of course, because the idea of education is not to learn. The idea of education is to get people to be good producers. And so if indeed that is the intention of education, that we should not be surprised of the results that we actually get from following all of these steps that we have. Unfortunately, we tend to concentrate on the symptoms, but we really need to get to the root cause. And I think that both you, Michael, and you're getting there. But the real issue is that the education has nothing to do with learning, but that's what we need. That's what we need.
So this would be it for today. Thank you so much for joining and bearing with us. And I see you on the next one.